After the chaos of Babel, when humanity lost its unity and the imposing Tower of Arrogance was abandoned like a monument on the plains of Shinar, people scattered in confusion, each speaking languages they no longer understood. It was a divine judgment, but also a new dawn. The Canaanites, descendants of Ham, from a lineage marked by rebellion, migrated from the ruins of Babel to new lands. Driven by a yearning for greatness, ambition, and dominance, they traveled for days, weeks, perhaps years, crossing relentless deserts, scorching hills, and nameless valleys. One day they finally reached the Jordan Valley. There, before their eyes, a paradise unfolded. A lush, moist, and fertile plain, adorned with fruit trees, fields bursting with golden wheat, and a river winding through it, as if the very earth were breathing. And there they declared, "Here we shall erect our glory, here we shall restore Sodom." The foundation was brutal, mirroring the determination of its people. Sodom was built with blood and fire, for every stone was arduously conquered. Every inch of land was irrigated with sweat and dominance. The Canaanites toiled like possessed men. They shaped the rock with bronze tools, tracing straight streets that cut through the city like veins of order and power. They built high, thick, and impenetrable walls, as if challenging the world to dare enter without permission. They mastered engineering. They erected perfect canals that brought the waters of the Jordan to their fields, squares, and gardens. They controlled agriculture, and the earth, as if enchanted, responded with abundance: figs, dates, barley, grapes, and linen. Soon the city began to attract people from distant lands. Merchants arrived from Egypt, caravans from Arabia, travelers from Anatolia. Everyone desired to behold the jewel of the plain. Sodom's residences were tall, built of white stone, with wide doors and spacious terraces. Purple fabrics floated like banners in the breeze, and the aroma of incense and freshly baked bread permeated the air. There were fountains sculpted with mythological scenes, hanging gardens irrigated by hidden canals, and squares where musicians played lutes, drums, and flutes. At night, the city glowed with torches, dance, music, laughter, and excess. The town was prosperous, immensely prosperous. Trade was its essence. Caravans arrived laden with gold, ivory, precious stones, perfumed oils, spiced wine, and even enslaved people. Sodom's forges produced fine weapons. Sculptors carved images of gods with such vivid detail they seemed to breathe. Tailors worked linen, silk, leather, all with mastery. And when it was time to establish a throne, the people elected the most cunning, the most charismatic, the most ambitious of all, Bera, the first king of Sodom. Bera was young, with an impeccable face and a seductive tongue. He possessed the dangerous gift of making the immoral seem right and distortion shine like virtue. He governed with a captivating smile, but behind it lay a corruption as deep as it was silent. Under his reign, Sodom reached the pinnacle of its glory and also descended into the shadows of its deepest decay. On the other hand, simultaneously with Sodom's ascent in the fertile lands of the Jordan as a city of power and wealth, Gomorrah was erected further south, in the shadow of its older sister, but with a distinct essence, more subtle, more ornate, more intoxicated by art and pleasure. If Sodom was a jewel sculpted with force and ambition, Gomorrah was a poisonous flower of irresistible beauty. Its foundation was less brutal and more aesthetic. The Canaanites who established it were skilled in sculpting, music, poetry, and architecture, renowned for their attention to detail and aesthetic form. They chose the gentle hills south of the valley, where the sun set with a golden light at dusk. There they built delicately adorned temples, polished stone streets, and houses that resembled palaces, embellished with hanging gardens, purple and blue linen curtains, and fountains where water fell like melody. Gomorrah did not compete with Sodom in terms of strength, but rather in elegance. It was a city where the arts flourished, where songs narrated legends and theaters staged dramas of gods and human passions. The people indulged in sensory delight. Every festival was a celebration of the body, of pleasures, of unlimited freedom. There, the sacred mingled with the sensual. Fertility rituals transformed into mass spectacles, where men and women, intoxicated with wine and desire, surrendered without shame, without morals, without conscience. Gomorrah's first king was Bircher, a man with a sharp face, an engaging voice, and an intoxicating gaze. He was a master in the art of pleasing the people. Under his leadership, lust became institutionalized, and pleasure became law. He governed not by force, but by seduction. Bircher fostered a culture of absolute freedom, where every form of desire was valid. And so, Sodom and Gomorrah became an infernal duo, two jewels of power and perversion on the Jordan plain. Each fueled the other's corruption. Among the many abominations they committed was homosexuality. The first signs emerged with abundance. When man no longer fights for bread, he begins to fight against limits. And the men of Sodom, rich, idle, and proud, began to pervert natural desires. They stopped seeking women and began to covet other men, first in secret, then among their circles of power, and soon, without any shame, in the streets, in the squares, at the doors of houses. This sin was not a mere hidden practice, nor a fleeting deviation. It was the culture, the norm, an institutionalized pride. What in other nations was still considered a secret shame, in Sodom and Gomorrah was proclaimed as a symbol of freedom, as a crown of identity amidst a society intoxicated with itself. They boasted of their uncontrolled appetite, displaying it as a virtue. At the king's banquets, it was common for guests to engage in relationships with young men brought as offerings of desire. There was no need to hide it, nor was there any need to silence it. For in Sodom the wicked were exalted, and the applause of men silenced the voice of God. Temples dedicated to false gods were places where fertility was worshipped not through conjugal love, but through acts that violated everything sacred. Men with men, priests with acolytes, old with young, all under the guise of a spiritual connection, all protected under the banner of a false divinity. Pleasure was their god, perversion their liturgy. Children grew up seeing impurity as an example. They were taught that there are no limits, that desire is the only law. They were shown images, told stories, and instructed to reject any teaching that came from a god of prohibitions. Judges did not punish immorality. On the contrary, they punished the righteous person who denounced it. And the foreigners passing through the city gates, the men of Sodom did not consider them as guests, but as prey for their lust. No one entered Sodom without being tempted, without being touched, without being tested. The most sacred act, the union between man and woman, designed by God since Eden, was trampled, ridiculed, and replaced by a culture of unnatural relationships, dominated by the desire for dominance, pleasure, and ego. There was no love, no fidelity, only impulse, only desire, only flesh and prosperity. And it was precisely this prosperity that attracted Lot. While living with his uncle Abraham, Lot also experienced great prosperity. His flocks grew, his tents multiplied, and his possessions became so extensive that an inevitable conflict soon arose. Abraham's shepherds and Lot's shepherds argued. They clashed, they accused each other. The land could no longer sustain such great blessings. What was once unity was now a source of tension. The harmony that once bound them began to break under the weight of abundance. It was then that Abraham, the man of the altar, the friend of God, rose with a father's dignity. He approached his nephew Lot, the young man he had taken in since his father's death. He looked at him with tenderness, but also with firmness, and said, "Let there be no strife between you and me. If you go left, I will go right. You choose first." And Lot lifted his eyes, and what he saw changed his destiny. Before him lay the plain of Jordan, an earthly paradise. It was like Eden before the fall. Green fields, crystal waters, fresh air. And there, shining like a temptation wrapped in gold, were the cities of the plain, and among them Sodom. From afar, Sodom was a spectacle. Its towers touched the sky. Its markets rang with the sound of silver and gold coins. Its squares were filled with people, aromas, music, and laughter. It was a lively, seductive, and powerful city, and Lot fell for its beauty. He did not ask God. He did not seek counsel. He looked and desired. It was the beginning of the end. With confident steps, Lot separated from Abraham and descended towards the plain. At first he pitched his tent near Sodom, very close, just on the outskirts. But like a shadow that lengthens at dusk, Sodom's influence enveloped him. Soon his business was within the city, then his house, and finally his heart. Lot lived in Sodom, amidst the perversion, the debauchery, the sin, and he did not leave. Though his righteous soul was distressed by what he saw, luxury spoke louder to him. Comfort lulled him to sleep. Silence chained him. He sought prosperity without considering the consequences this decision would have on his family. So, blinded by abundance, he followed his path without considering the future of his people. There, amid that corrupt city, Lot raised his daughters, young, pure women, born under their father's faith, but exposed every day to Sodom's darkness. They saw the perversion with their own eyes. They heard the screams that tore through the nights. They witnessed the impure rituals performed in broad daylight. They walked through streets filled with men lost in homosexuality, where sin was not hidden but celebrated with pride. They grew up in a place without an altar, where the name of God was ridiculed, where impurity became customary, the sacred a forgotten memory. Despite this, Lot's daughters were promised to 2 men from Sodom, but these men did not fear God. They were part of Sodom, born in its streets, shaped by its environment. They may not have participated in the worst excesses, but they were neither righteous nor holy, nor obedient to Abraham's God. And so life continued in Sodom and Gomorrah. Every day these cities sank deeper and deeper into open and flagrant rebellion against God. But God would not let this go unnoticed. The Almighty, who had been patient, who had waited, who had observed in silence, had heard the cry, a cry that rose from the earth like bitter smoke, the cry of the oppressed, of the despised righteous, of profaned innocence, reached the throne of heaven. And then judgment was decreed. But before the fire descended, God decided to visit his friend Abraham. In the heat of the day, while the patriarch sat at his tent's entrance, the Lord appeared to him, accompanied by 2 heavenly men. Abraham saw them, ran to them, and honored them, unaware that at that moment he was about to hear a sentence that would shake his heart. "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great," said the Lord, "and their sin is very grave. I will go down now and see if they have committed their iniquity." Abraham trembled. He thought of his nephew Lot, of his family, of the remote possibility that there might still be righteous people amidst so much darkness. And with tears in his soul and a trembling voice, he interceded before God. "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked, Lord? If there were 50 righteous, would you destroy them?" And God replied, "If I find 50 righteous in Sodom, I will spare the whole city for their sake." And Abraham pressed on, "What if there were 45, 40, 30, 20, 10? But with each plea, the answer was the same. "If there are 10 righteous, I will forgive." However, in all the land of Sodom and Gomorrah, not even that small ray of light was found. Evil contaminated everything. Even the fiancés of Lot's daughters scoffed at the message of salvation. And then the 2 angels departed for Sodom. They descended from the heights in the form of men, bearers of God's judgment. The city still sang, still laughed, still reveled in its sin, unaware that its final night had begun. When they arrived, Lot was sitting at the city gate. He was not there by chance. He was in his position as a judge, fulfilling his duty among a perverse generation. and when he saw them, something inside him trembled. He immediately stood up, prostrated himself on the ground, and begged them to enter his house. They agreed to the invitation and entered Lot's house. They closed the door behind them, and night fell over Sodom like a thick, silent blanket. But hell was about to break loose. It didn't take long. News spread like wildfire. Strangers arrived, new and different men, and the rumors awakened the city's dormant lust. From every corner, every house, every immoral street, they began to gather. Young and old, all the men of Sodom came and surrounded Lot's house like a pack of thirsty dogs. There was a pounding at the door. They were shouting. They demanded, "Where are the men who came to spend the night at your house? Bring them out! We want to have sex with them!" The perversion was no longer hidden. Now it demanded. It wanted to penetrate every last corner, even the dwelling of the righteous. Lot went out of the house in despair. He closed the door behind him and faced the crowd with a pounding heart. "I beg you, my brothers, do not do this evil." And then, in a desperate act, perhaps influenced by the culture that surrounded him, Lot offered his daughters. "I have 2 daughters who have never known a man. I will bring them out to you, and you may do with them whatever you like. But do nothing to these men, for they have come under the protection of my roof." But the men of Sodom did not want the daughters. They were not looking for women. They wanted men. Their lust was specific, deviant, violent. "Get out of our way," they shouted. "This foreigner came to judge us. We will do more harm to you than to them." And they attacked Lot. But then the hand of heaven intervened. The angels opened the door, grabbed Lot, and pulled him inside. And with a single word, with a single glance, the eyes of the men of Sodom were struck with blindness. Darkness enveloped them. They stumbled over each other. They groped for the door. They cursed. They screamed. But they could no longer see because the judgment had begun, and the clock of grace was running out. The angels urgently turned to Lot. "Do you have anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this city. The outcry against it is so great that it has reached heaven, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." Lot trembled. He ran to his sons-in-law, the men engaged to his daughters, and pleaded with them, "Get up, leave this place, because God is going to destroy the city." But they scoffed. They thought he was joking. They didn't believe him, and they stayed to die. When dawn began to break, the angels urged Lot to proceed. "Get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here and leave, lest you perish in the punishment of the city." But he hesitated. He still loved that place. He was still looking back. And then the angels took him by the hand, him, his wife, his 2 daughters, and they led them out. They dragged them out because God's mercy still burned over Lot. And when they were outside, one of the angels spoke with power. "Flee for your lives. Do not look back. Do not stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you will perish." Lot ran with his family. The sun was rising. Meanwhile, the men of Sodom and Gomorrah continued in their wickedness. The streets were full of life at dawn, but not with worship, rather with sin. The noise was not of prayer, but of mocking laughter, of corrupted markets, of profane altars, of bodies offered as worship to the flesh. Drums continued to sound in pagan temples. Priests danced amidst incense and perversion, and no one imagined that heaven was no longer silent. The judgment was already underway, and they were unaware of it. And it was at that moment, amidst their arrogance, that the heavens opened. It was no ordinary storm, no mere rain. It was the roar of judgment, the roar of the Eternal's wrath. A gigantic fissure formed in the heights, as if an invisible sword had torn heaven itself. From that opening, flames emerged, alive, conscious, thirsty. Showers of fire and brimstone began to fall with uncontrollable fury. Sodom trembled. Gomorrah screamed. Houses caught fire on contact. Entire towers collapsed in seconds. The earth opened up, devouring its inhabitants. It was as if hell had been unleashed on earth. The stones were burning, the air was fire, the rivers were boiling, the trees were exploding. The inhabitants fled in a frenzy, enveloped in smoke, drenched in sweat, covered in ashes. Mothers dragged their barefoot children through the burning streets. Arrogant men who once boasted of their power ran like aimless animals, their eyes filled with terror. The city's perfume was replaced by the stench of burning flesh and vaporized blood. Some pleaded with their gods, others knelt looking up at the sky. But the answer was more fire. Roofs were burning, sculptures melted like wax, and from afar, the howls of beasts fleeing to the desert could be heard, while the hearts of the cities collapsed under a rain of celestial fury. Lot, his face covered by a blanket, fled with his wife and daughters. Behind them, hell consumed everything, but she, Lot's wife, could not resist. Her curiosity was stronger than her fear. She turned her head, just for a second, a moment, and she was petrified. Her flesh vanished, her soul froze. A white, sad pillar of salt rose where once stood a wife, a mother, a wise woman. And as the family continued to escape, in the distance, it was possible to see the last breath of the cursed cities. The ground still smoked, the stones were hot to the touch. Ravens circled over what were once human empires, and the wind carried with it the smell of God's justice. The sky swallowed Sodom. Gomorrah wiped off the map. Lot, in turn, ran not by strength, not by choice. He ran because God was pulling him out of the hell he had called home for years. His body was safe, but his soul still trembled. His daughters followed him, covered in ashes, without a mother, without land, without hope. They were the last of their lineage, the last survivors of the apocalypse. They arrived at Zoar, a small and insignificant city, ignored by the flames, but not by fear. There, it did not rain fire, but it rained nightmares. Lot could not sleep. He saw faces in fire in his dreams. He heard screams every time he closed his eyes. He felt the weight of his wife turning to salt with a single turn of her head. There was no peace in Zoar, only a constant whisper that said, "It's not over yet." And so fear drove them out again. Like shadows, they climbed into the mountains, and there, in the solitude of a cave, they hid. Darkness embraced them, cold penetrated their bones, and silence spoke to them in that abyss of loneliness. No men, no people, no hope. Lot's daughters began to talk to each other. They grew up in Sodom amidst orgies, idolatry, and perversion. Although they escaped judgment, judgment did not escape them. And there, among the stones, an idea sprouted. An idea that could only be born from a heart deformed by sin. There is no man on earth who can come into us. Let's make our father drunk and lie with him to preserve our offspring. And so they did. On the first night, they prepared the wine and served it. Lot drank until he was unconscious. And when silence reigned, the older daughter entered the cave. She slept with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she got up. The sin was sown. The next night they repeated the act. The younger followed in her sister's footsteps. Lot, drunk again, slept with his second daughter, and he also did not know. In those nights, deep in the cave, the sin that God had buried under fire resurfaced in the wombs of those young women. And from those wombs were born Moab and Ben-Ami, two names that would be a curse for generations, two nations that would erect pagan altars, that would burn their children in sacrifices, that would wage war against Israel, that would blaspheme the name of the living God. The sin of Sodom did not die with the fire. It hid in a cave, multiplied, and became a nation. And so the world learned a forgotten lesson. It's not enough to flee judgment. You must be transformed, because otherwise the curse that destroyed a city will be installed in your lineage. What lessons do you draw from the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? Share your thoughts below.